So, to the First Minister. In just under 2 weeks' time, Humza Yousaf will have been a year in the job, and it's fair to say it's not been the easiest of years. 11 weeks after he was sworn in, his predecessor, Nicola Sturgeon, was arrested, then released as part of a police investigation into the party's finances. That investigation, of course, still ongoing now. In Parliament, he had to abandon the Gender Recognition Reform Bill after the Scottish Secretary, Alistair Jack, blocked it from coming into law. On a personal level, he's endured the trauma of his parents-in-law getting stuck in Gaza as Israeli troops invaded. And just last week, one of his closest allies, the former Health Secretary, Michael Matheson, was found to have breached the MSP's code of conduct over the use of an iPad. And all of this with polls suggesting his party is shedding support just a few months away from a general election. So, again, not the easiest of years. But how does he feel it's gone? Well, let's ask him now. Good morning, First Minister.
Good morning, Martin.
So, this anniversary coming up in less than a fortnight, how do you think your first year has gone?
There's genuinely not a day that goes by where I don't wake up, and I'm absolutely honoured and privileged to be the First Minister of the country that I love, the country where I'm raising my kids, the only country that I call home. That's a huge and enormous privilege, and one that I never ever take for granted. Of course, being First Minister does come with its odd challenges here and there, and you verbalised and articulated some of those in your introduction. But the ability to make a difference in people's lives is something, again, that I never take for granted, and actually is a huge responsibility that I take and my whole cabinet and government takes incredibly seriously.
Is the country a better place now than it was a year ago?
I would certainly hope so. One example I can give you of that is, of course, recent modelling that has showed that an estimated 100,000 children in Scotland will be lifted out of poverty because of the various anti-poverty measures we brought forward, like, for example, the Scottish child payment. That figure before, of course, was 90,000. And that, of course, bucking the trend of the UK. And, of course, despite the headwinds from Westminster, such as 14 years of austerity, Brexit and a cost of living crisis that has been made in Westminster.
The Child Poverty Action Group said the progress to tackle child poverty has stalled after a bitterly disappointing budget. So it's not all good in that direction, is it?
I would disagree with that. Actually, our independent analysis, again, shows 100,000 children will be lifted out of poverty because of the actions we're taking. I'm confident that we'll be able to meet those interim poverty targets in relation to child poverty. And remember, Martin, we're doing all of this in the face of really strong headwinds from Westminster. 14 years of austerity, a Brexit that undoubtedly has damaged our economy, and a cost of living crisis that is making Scots suffer despite the fact they had nothing to do with it.
Here's another analysis of what's happened over the past year. You've slumped in the polls, you've got rid of key policies, as we've just described. Cancer waiting times have gone up, there's trouble in schools, drug deaths are on the rise again after some progress, and you've fallen out with our local authorities. If you look at it like that, it's not a great report card, is it?
Well, not only have we reset the business relationship, so the new deal for business, we also, of course, signed the Verity House agreement, which reset our relationship
and then immediately
with
broke
local
it.
authorities. And of course, despite all of the challenges that you mentioned, we, of course, continue by most polls to be ahead of our opponents. In fact, some polls even show that that gap is widening. So I'm not complacent. I should say that very clearly. I think you've got to work extremely hard to earn and re-earn the trust of the Scottish people. The very reason why I'm confident that we can win the general election, very simply because people out there absolutely understand that the SNP and only the SNP will ensure that Scotland's voice is heard at Westminster.
Sure, I'm going to come on to that in a second. Let me just pull you up on the polls, though, First Minister. Let me just pull you up on the polls. You are slumping at the polls. You are losing support in the polls. You may be just ahead of your opponents, depending on which poll you look at the moment. But one poll I saw recently said that your main opponent at the moment, Anas Sarwar, looked like a better leader than you do, and you're in danger of losing perhaps 20 seats at this election to Scottish Labour. So you're not doing well, are you, in terms of the polls?
You can pick out one poll. I'll give you a couple. I mean,
well, show me a poll where you're doing better than you are just now.
Comfortably ahead of Labour. Surveytion showed that that gap was widening between the SNP and Labour. I'm genuinely telling you, I think it's going to be a tough election. I said that yesterday. No election is an easy one. We've got to do what the SNP has always done. We're going to graft. We're going to talk to everybody in every single doorstep, in every town, in every city, in every village in the country, and make the point that it's only with a group of SNP MPs Do you ensure that Scotland's voice is heard? Do you ensure that Scotland isn't an afterthought in the way that Westminster parties treat us?
Well, you're not holding a spring conference this year, but you did have a kind of gathering, an event yesterday in Perth, a one-day event in Perth. You told delegates that this election actually is a fight between you and the Tories in most of Scotland. What about Labour?
Well, first of all, that's just an arithmetic reality. That when it comes to most seats, they are either held by the Conservatives, and the SNP is in second place, or indeed the SNP it holds a seat.
But your main threat is Labour.
Now, what I would say is that there's a historic... I will come to Labour in a second, don't worry. But when it comes to the Conservatives, let me say this. Scotland has a real opportunity, historic opportunity, to ensure that we kick out every single Conservative MP out of Scotland, and they deserve nothing less. And the only way to do that is to vote for the SNP, because the SNP is second place in every single Conservative seat. When it comes to Labour, don't worry, we'll be taking the challenge to Labour, and the reason we'll be doing that is because Labour have aligned themselves with the same failing Westminster orthodoxy that has done us so much damage, whether that's keeping Scotland out of the European Union, whether it's retaining the two-child limit, whether it's lifting the cap on bankers' bonuses, keeping the bedroom tax, keeping public spending cuts that are going to be possibly deeper than the Conservatives are planning anyway. And of course, both parties are going to rob the North East in order to either, in Labour's case, fund new nuclear power stations in England, or in the Conservatives' case, give a tax cut to the wealthy. So whether it's Labour or Tories, the SNP will take the fight.
But Labour are going to win big
point to every single person
in Scotland, aren't
they?
Sorry, Labour are going to win big at this election. That's the mantra you've been promoting. Labour are going to win big, and there's no way around that. You've used that, I think, perhaps confusingly to some people, as a campaign strategy.
No, what I've said is very clear. I believe in being honest with people, Martin. The honesty is, and you and I have just talked polls, you can't show me a single poll that doesn't show that Keir Starmer's not going to be the next Prime Minister of the UK. He's going to be the next Prime Minister. The point is, Keir Starmer doesn't need Scotland to win, but Scotland does need SNP MPs to make sure our voice is heard in Westminster. And that's why I'm confident that we'll win the general election. Because, look, people might not agree with every single policy. I hope they would, but they might not agree with every single policy of the SNP. But what's undeniable, what I hear from people on the doorsteps time and time again, is they are absolutely confident that the only way that Scotland's voice is heard is if you have SNP MPs.
But your voice isn't heard at Westminster, First Minister. You're discussing leaving Westminster because of the way you're being treated there. You're specifically angry that nobody is listening to you down there. You wanted the Speaker removed. Nobody listened to that. The problem you've got in Westminster at the moment, which is acknowledged by all of your MPs there, is that you're not being paid attention to.
No, if it wasn't for the SNP, then there'd be so many issues, of course, which would have gone unchallenged. Whether it was Joanna Cherry many years ago rightly taking Boris Johnson to task for trying to illegally shut down Parliament, whether it's more recently, of course, the issue of Gaza. There wouldn't be a vote on the ceasefire, and Labour wouldn't have changed their position if it wasn't for SNP MPs. And we know, of course, that the majority of the Scottish public support that immediate ceasefire. Well, Labour wouldn't have shifted their position if it wasn't for the SNP. I can give you many other examples. If it, Marion Fellows, for example, MP, SNP MP, was championing the cause of sub-postmasters and mistresses, not just in Scotland, I have to say, right across the UK, well before any ITV drama took place. Stuart MacDonald, MP, was there making sure that those parents who have a child who's needing neonatal care get better rights, more leave, and so on and so forth. So the SNP MPs have made a difference, will continue to make a difference, and my message is pretty clear. If you want Scotland's voice to be heard by Westminster, you have to vote for the SNP.
OK, that does seem contrary to the narrative of Westminster at the moment. But anyway, let's move on. Whoever comes in to power at the next election, the one thing that virtually every party, apart from your partners in government, that should be said, seems to agree on is that economic growth is the key to getting the country out of the mess that it's in at the moment. What are you doing at the moment specifically to promote and generate economic growth in Scotland? And would you agree with those who say that your tax policy at the moment actually is counter to that? It's a disincentive to people to come and invest and do business in this country.
No, I wouldn't. And first, let's recognise the context within which we're operating. The majority, of course, of these monetary and fiscal levers still lie in the hands of Westminster. And the biggest challenge to our economy, without a shadow of a doubt, of course, has been the damage that Brexit has done, a complete and utter unmitigated disaster. There is now almost no dispute whatsoever from independent analysis about the economic damage that Brexit has done and continues
I'm going to let you come back to this answer,
so
but I'm just
again
interested in one question here, First Minister. I'm sorry to interrupt you, and I do want to come back to that point. But you talk a lot, and you inject that into lots of answers. There's no doubt about the damage Brexit has done. How would you envisage the first 5 or 10 years post-independence economically in Scotland?
Well, again, I think there's a huge opportunity because what we're able to do is have the fiscal levers, many of the monetary levers, to be able to make a difference when it comes to Scotland's economy.
Do you think they would be easy, or do you think they would be difficult?
Well, again, I don't doubt for a minute, Martin, I've always been upfront and honest about this, that an independent Scotland, of course, will no doubt face the same economic challenges that any other country does. The difference being, of course, with independence is that you have the full levers to be able to respond to those. So let's look at independent nations in Europe of Scotland's size: Ireland, Norway, Denmark, Austria. Why is it that each and every single one of those countries has a higher national income per head, has higher productivity than the UK?
Sure, but they've been independent for a long, long time. I'm asking you about the process.
And they don't have half the assets that Scotland do. Scotland has world-class food and drink, it has world-class universities, it has renewable potential, oil and gas, an incredibly hard-working and talented population. I could go on and on. So with independence, I'm confident that we could be far more economically, not just productive, but be more economically successful than we currently are. Anchored
but it might take a while.
Brexit
The point I'm making is transition can be difficult.
No, I disagree with your point. I'm making the point that from day one of independence, we will have the majority of those levers. And of course, that makes a big, big difference in order to respond to the shocks of the global economy. Now, you asked me, the original question you asked me was, what is the Scottish Government doing in terms of economic growth? And I've given you the overview of the challenging context of the UK government. But of course, we have an incredibly generous Scottish small business bonus scheme. That is lifting about 100,000 properties out of rates altogether. In fact, through our scheme, around 95% of properties are eligible for lower property tax than elsewhere in the UK. When it comes, of course, to business, that's why we've signed the New Deal for Business. When it comes to one of our greatest strengths in the economy, when it comes to renewables, we are signed a deal with onshore, about onshore wind in order to reduce the consenting time that it takes for onshore wind projects to come onto scale. We've launched
Do you think the business
food and drink
community
strategy,
see you
one
as
of
a
our greatest
pro-business party?
Exports. Well, look, I would certainly hope so. I've certainly engaged with a lot of business organisations. They're very grateful for the increased engagement from the SNP over the year. But look, I accept fully that you'll be judged not by your warm words, but by your deeds. And your second question to me was about income tax. Let me go back to the point that despite 14 years of austerity, because of, frankly, Brexit that has damaged our economy and a cost of living crisis, I make no apology, Martin, none whatsoever, for asking those who are in the top 5% of earners, somebody like me on a First Minister's salary, pays more so that we can invest in our public services.
But the Fiscal Commission reckon that policy will make £8 million.
Conservatives who have chosen to give people in an MP salary £1,500.
Sure, but your tax policy, according to the Fiscal Commission, will raise virtually nothing. It's performative, they're saying. It will raise £8 million.
It's not. It's going to raise millions of pounds, not just in its first year of operation. Then, of course,
53 million will be raised, 45 million will disappear in behavioural change, the Fiscal Commission believe.
Look, let's take that point about behavioural change. Ever since the SNP has been on this journey of progressive taxation, we've been told by our political opponents that there'll be a mass exodus of people from Scotland. The facts, of course, don't bear that out. If you look at National Records of Scotland, their facts show pretty clearly that there's a net in-migration to Scotland.
It's not just people leaving, it's people working less.
More people are coming to Scotland than leaving.
Okay.
Well, again, under the SNP, we've seen record lows in relation to unemployment. We've seen record numbers of people in work under the SNP government, something I'm very proud of.
Let me ask you about Michael Matheson, your good friend. You described him as a man of integrity and honesty. That was after you knew what had happened with the iPad. Given what we now know, and given the findings of the report that was published last week, do you still believe him to be a man of integrity and honesty?
Look, Michael made a mistake. There's no ifs, buts, or maybes about that. And decent people can make mistakes. I mean, if there's somebody out there who's lived a saintly life that's completely unblemished, then so be it. But Michael has made a mistake. He's paid the price for that, literally paid back all of the money, of course, and he'll obviously now be referred to the Parliament Standards Committee, who will then decide to make a judgment, and I won't interfere in that process. So Michael made a mistake, and not only that, of course, he also lost his job in government, and he's paying a price for that. So look, decent people can make mistakes, Martin.
Do you think his job as an MSP is under threat?
No, again, I don't think that's the case. He's a decent person that made a mistake. There's MSPs that have made mistakes, and they've have to face the consequences of those mistakes. I've not heard Michael suggest anything other than he'll accept whatever the consequences are, and I'm sure he will accept whatever the parliamentary committee decides and deliberates on.
He resigned. With hindsight, should you have sacked him?
Well, I'm somebody who genuinely believes in due process, and I said that at the time. It was important that Michael had that due process. The Scottish Parliamentary Corporate Body then investigated the matter. When it became abundantly clear that the Parliamentary Corporate Body that investigation was going to take up a significant amount of Michael's time, he and I agreed that he should step back from government and concentrate on that process. And we have a fantastic Health Secretary in Neil Gray, hit the ground running, making sure he's tackling some of the biggest issues of the day. So look, people can decide, and you've got every right, of course, to ask me about Michael Matheson. What I'm concentrating on is making sure we're supporting the NHS through its recovery, and I'm delighted the SNP in its latest budget made sure that we prioritise the NHS with £19.5 billion of funding, and making sure that we put our public services first.
All right, let me ask you about something else. Frank Hester, Conservative donor, donated a huge amount of money to the Conservatives in the last year. Of course, we now know, it said last week, or it was reported last week, he had previously said Diane Abbott makes him want to hate all black women and she should be shot. You've got a new hate crime bill coming into force in Scotland in less than a fortnight. Would he be prosecuted under that bill?
First of all, I'll leave it to the police to decide who gets prosecuted, and of course the Crown to decide who gets prosecuted and who doesn't. But let's be under no illusions. The remarks from Frank Hester were racist, they were misogynist, and they undoubtedly incited hatred. And look, you mentioned that speech that I made to party delegates yesterday. I thought it was quite a moving moment when the entire delegates, the campaign council, stood up spontaneously after I mentioned Diane Abbott and asked the party to show solidarity with Diane Abbott. They decided to give her a standing ovation because we support anybody, whatever political tradition they're from. If they're facing hatred, then the SNP absolutely has your back. And I say that to Diane Abbott, that although I've seen in recent days, in fact, briefing which seems to have come from the Labour Party against Diane Abbott, when it comes to what she's faced, Diane Abbott should be under, I hope she will be comforted by the fact that the SNP stands with her in solidarity against the hatred. And I think there's not a parliamentarian in the country that's faced the levels of hatred that Diane Abbott has over the years, and the SNP stands full square behind her against those who propagate that hatred. OK.
In terms of language, do you regret your use of the word traitors in relation to your political opponents at First Minister's questions recently?
I don't think I used the term. If I did, I'll double check. But of course, that was the front page of the P&G, which was
which you chose to use, which you chose to bring up
a political drama. It was again a parody of a drama that is on the television, a good TV programme. In fact, if I've managed to catch an episode or two of it.
But hang on a second.
I would say
you know that hang on a second,
doubt.
First Minister. You know words carry consequences. That word is a particularly brutal word, and you chose to amplify it. You said when pushed on it that that was a very good and very important front page. Do you regret saying that?
No, I don't regret saying that. I think that the front page was an important front page. If you want to take it up with the P&J, Martin, you can have the editor of the P&J on your programme. I would make this point.
To agree with
There's
it.
no doubt at all.
Do you think they're traitors? Do you think that Anas Sarwar, Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, Ed Miliband are traitors?
No, what I think is that they are in danger of betraying the people of the North East by throwing 100,000 workers on the scrap heap. That's what I think they're in danger of doing. And of course, anybody who is willing to throw workers in the North East on the scrap heap will face a very heavy electoral price for that, and we will make sure that everybody in the North East knows that Labour are willing to raid the North East in order to build new nuclear power stations in England and Wales. By the way, the SNP supports the windfall tax. In fact, we've suggested that it should include, of course, potentially other companies Two, what we don't believe in is raiding the North East to build new nuclear power stations in England, which is what the Labour Party want to do at potentially, what the industry is telling us, at the risk of 100,000 jobs. That's unforgivable.
In terms of the election, Operation Branchform, 3 years in, this investigation into your police investigation into your party finances. 3 years in, I think almost £1.5 million down now in terms of the investigation, or that's what's been spent on it. Would you rather that was concluded before the election campaign begins? Would you rather have the slate cleared?
Yeah. Look, Martin, I know exactly why you're asking me the question. You've got every right to do so. I've been asked this question for almost a year since I've been party leader, and my response has been the same, because I think it is important for me not to comment on a live police investigation. If I did so, if I answered your question, then that could be seen as prejudicing an ongoing inquiry. I don't intend to do that.
That's fine.
And that could be quite frankly difficult at times, but it's important for me not to comment on a live police investigation.
Here's a question that's loosely related to that you may choose not to answer, but you certainly legally are open to answer. Your Westminster party leader, Stephen Flynn, has said that the camper van at the centre of all of this should be released from police custody and given to the Tartan Army to enable some of them to offset the expensive price of German hotels during the European Football Championships. Do you think the camper van should be given to Scottish football fans this summer?
Again, I'm not going to get into a live police investigation. If you want to ask Stephen about his comments, feel free to bring Stephen on your programme. But I'll say, as leader of the SNP, very clearly that my job is to not in any way prejudice a live police investigation. I don't intend to do that. The investigation will take as long as it's going to take, and of course it will come to whatever conclusion they believe.
He has been asked about that, and he doubled down very happily on it with a big grin on his face, I have to say. The other thing that's been suggested about this camper van, by the way, is that it would be very useful, seriously very useful to your party to use in an election campaign as a campaign asset. It is a bit of a trope now, this thing. Would you travel around the country in it, campaigning?
Again, I'm not going to comment on a live police investigation. I do salute your indefatigability in your attempts to do so. What I can say about the election campaign is that whatever mode of transport I'm using, I intend to get to every single constituency up and down this gorgeous and beautiful country to make the case that it is only with SNP MPs will Scotland's voice be heard in Westminster.
Well, we don't know when that'll be, so we don't know what the weather would be like in this gorgeous and beautiful country. I wish we had a better idea.
Rain, sun, hail, snow, whatever the weather is.
That is a safe bet. Yeah, spring, summer, autumn, winter, all 4 in one day, whatever time of the year the election is. First Minister Humza Yousaf, thank you very much indeed for your time with us on the Sunday show this morning.
Thanks, Martin.